Welcome to episode 171 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/171.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of the podcast. So this is the final time I'm going to make this announcement. As I've talked about in the last two podcast episodes, 7 Health is hiring. We're looking for another nutrition practitioner to start working with us. There is a job spec up on the site, which you can see at www.7-health.com/jobs. And then there's also episode 169 of the show where I go into a lot more detail about what we're looking for. And that episode is also linked on the job spec page. Applications for the position close on Friday, the 8th of November. So a day after this episode will be released. But if you're listening to this in time and you're a practitioner and have experience helping people with disordered eating and eating disorders and overcoming dieting, then please check out the job spec and get in contact if you're interested in the position. If you've worked with a practitioner and you think they may be interested, then please forward over the job spec to them. If you follow someone on Instagram or on Facebook or listen to someone's podcast and you like the content they're putting out and think they could be interested, then DM them or email them or get in contact with them. And if you're a member of a Facebook group and you think there may be people in there who'd be interested in hearing about it, then please post a message about it. Thank you in advance for whatever help you can offer. And as I said, the job closes on the 8th of November, or applications close on the 8th of November. So on this week's show, it's a guest interview, and I'm chatting with Tracy Brown. So Tracy is a somatic nutrition therapist / dietitian, attuned eating coach, and counseling skills teacher. She helps people come home to themselves through their bodies by healing their relationship with food and weight, as well as feel safer and less stressed in their bodies. Since 2006, she has guided people one-on-one and in groups in healing from disordered eating and chronic dieting, many of which have also had other stress-related conditions. And she provides trauma-informed training and supervision to health professionals as well. And you can find the info for both of those on tracybrownrd.com and then embodieddietitian.com. So I've been aware of Tracy's work for a number of years. She's a member in a number of the groups that I'm in, and she regularly posts videos and video content that is really helpful. I also saw that she's done training around Polyvagal Theory, and this is something that I've been reading more about recently, and so thought she would be a great person to come on and talk about the topic. So as part of the conversation, we talk about Tracy's background, her own struggles with an eating disorder, and how this was connected to being a highly sensitive person. And when I say highly sensitive, I'm referring to the work of Eileen Aaron. And so we actually talk about this and how helpful it was for Tracy to discover this concept. We talk about Tracy's training as a dietitian and how this didn't match up with what she thought it would be like. We then spend the bulk of the time talking about polyvagal theory and how this approach can be helpful when working with the clients. And if you've never heard the term polyvagal theory, please don't be put off. We cover what it is and a lot of practical ideas around it. So this isn't just going to be useful for practitioners to hear about, but really for anyone interested, this will be highly applicable and really useful. Tracy is a really great guest, and I personally found this conversation really helpful. There's stuff that I've started to incorporate in what I do with clients because of things that Tracy mentioned during this conversation. So I hope you get out of it as much as I have. So with this intro out of the way, let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Tracy Brown. Hey, Tracy, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Oh, hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show, and I'm just grateful to be a part of all the years you've been contributing to, helping folks get free from food and body image worry. So I'm happy to be here.
Perfect. Well, thank you for those kind words at the start. So there's a couple of areas that I'm hoping we can touch on today, and I'm not sure how long we'll spend on each of them and what other places will go as part of this, but I definitely want to talk about polyvagal theory, like what it is, how you use it as a polyvagal approach when working with clients. And this can be around food, it can be around attunement, it could be around trauma and trauma recovery. And I also want to talk about like the hunger and fullness side of this and sort of the dysregulation that people can experience here and how that can be, say, connecting with the polyvagal piece, but also with body image struggles, for example.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there to cover. So I'm excited to dive in.
Perfect. So look, I guess to start with, do you want to give listeners a bit of background on yourself? So a bio of sorts, like who you are, what you do, what training you've done, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. These are always hard to do because it's like, tell the story of your life a little bit, not hard in a bad way. It's just, what do people really care about and what we don't, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, so I'm a registered dietitian in the United States, but really I kind of title myself as a somatic nutrition therapist and attuned eating and body image expert. And I'll say why all that in a little bit. But, my background started like a lot of people's who probably are in the helping field now is I recovered, luckily and gratefully, from anorexia and binge eating disorder and exercise compulsion back in my late teens, early 20s. And so at the time of this recording, it's, late 2019. So we're pushing over 20 years now. And I did actually have a lot of treatment trauma at the beginning. And the one really amazing bright spot in my recovery time was, working with a dietitian. And back then there weren't any, intuitive eating or health at every size or non-diet dietitians. But this woman somehow miraculously in the little town of 900 people that I grew up near, had a dietitian around. And she was familiar with Ellen Satter and introduced me to some other kind of pioneers of some of the early non-diet work. And it just blew me away of like, oh, I get choice and I can have some body autonomy. And even though I have a lot of fear, that can be worked through and you can actually be more normal than the average normal bear with food. And I'm like, oh, cool. This is what dietitians do. Awesome. And then I go to school to do this thinking I'm going to help people, maybe with disordered eating, maybe not, I don't know. But the relationship built is what helped me so much. It was just like this really respectful, compassionate, co-regulatory, what do you think, what do you need kind of experience.
Yeah.
And so I go to school and find out that's not how it rolls. That's not how it works. It's like, here's some facts and here's the right way and the wrong way to look and eat. And I'm not dissing at all. It wasn't all bad. But by the end, I was like, I'm going to have to learn a new way. Or I'm going to have to learn how to do it the way I experience this, or I'm going to have to find a new profession because I really just can't put people on diets because that's the thing I came out of. And I can't make people feel bad for inherently just naturally being a certain way. Because, I've been there, done that of trying to make my body be something that I want it to be. And so that was the long journey of finding, working with some great mentorship and doing thousands of hours of supervision to learn how to, and by this time we're talking, it's in the late, this is in the late 90s and then going into the 2000s of there's a book called Intuitive Eating now, and all those things are coming up and slowly growing in some momentum, and just learning how to not only help people learn to come back home to themselves and trust their body signals of hunger and fullness, but use the body as a resource, and how people are using food and what they're feeling inside and outside about their bodies has a lot to say about basically what's feeling too much and what was missing or what hasn't been enough. And we tend to and you're teaching people how to decode that. Like, instead of saying, oh, I feel fat, we learn how to say, well, what's feeling uncomfortable? What's feeling too much? What do we not have enough resource for to navigate that? Because what we're taught is, well, you feel bad, so it must be your body, so fix your body. Your body's too big, you're too much. Versus, well, actually what's internally sensing feeling too much. So anyway, that's kind of been the heart of my work. You know, for the last, I saw my very first client, I think February 1st, 2007, I think, for eating disorders and disordered eating and diet trauma and everything under the sun. And, you know, I know we'll talk about a little bit maybe later how I integrated the trauma, like trauma integrated that work, but that's kind of where I'm at in a nutshell. So
nice. Okay. Well, there is a lot that I want to go back through with that piece, and let's start with you and before you became a dietitian. So you as a kid, what was food like in your household?
You know, I was super fortunate, and I got to use these experiences to help me get well. There's other pieces that kind of were the barrier. So I actually grew up on a farm, and so learned like where food came from and how it works for the most part, and how to get it and where to get it, and eating and cooking like really what people would call pretty like high carb, high fat, to be honest. But again, I had good signals of hunger and fullness available to me, and there wasn't a lot of food shame because I grew up, you know, mostly in the 70s and 80s where there wasn't like really a lot of different macronutrient restriction. Yep. So my influences with diet culture were, unfortunately, my grandmother and my mother, and they both had a lot of their own internalized body self-hatred that came out externally. So it would be this weird world of like, you know, you eat, do your thing, don't pay attention to this over here doing cabbage soup diets and long fasts and all the things. And I just thought they were stupid, to be honest. But as I started to grow up, and it really was before puberty, where it was just started these subtle things of like, I wasn't changing yet, but people around me were changing, and people would comment about that. And I'm like, oh, so I need to worry about those things. Okay, mental note at 8 years old. But I didn't worry about it. You let it go. But as the years go by, you just get more influences and more people talking about each other's bodies. And I think the intensity ratcheted up with my the women in my family too, about how often they were dieting as they were aging as well. And it just got to the point where it's like, I'm not going to be like them. And if having a bigger body means you have to hate yourself, well, I'm not in. That's not going to happen. Mental note at 14. But it took like a kind of a relationship breakup trauma to really pretty quickly just dive me into like, oh, well, this is what people do that seem like they got it together and are cool and popular and have boyfriends. So I will just go on a diet. Okay. You know, it wasn't because I hated my body, but the restriction, you know, it triggered this for me, essentially. And I'm saying that because at the same time, all these things where it doesn't sound like my body image and my relationship with food were very bad, they weren't. But on the flip side is all the other things that you can look back in your life and say, oh, I was a really pretty anxious kid, pretty obsessive and compulsive kid, but nobody made it like it was a problem. They would just, you know, tell me not to be so sensitive and suck it up and you're fine. And so all of that repression and denial was a buildup to like, that was already happening in the background. And then I can look back now with some of the Polyvagal Theory stuff and epigenetics and looking at like, you know, cleaned up trauma from your ancestors is that like, oh yeah, I was just, somebody was going to get it and had to be somebody. I guess it was me, but this walking time bomb of like all this, you know, repressed, we don't talk about things stuff going on generationally. So for me, I look back like, well, what caused this for me? It was all that stuff. And just being in a hypercritical workaholic environment and restriction was the last straw that caused the eating disorder, really. It wasn't like I was, you know, I already had a lot of issues with like, you know, self-esteem and I don't think anybody likes me and I'm not very connected and very disembodied and all that was going on. And restriction just took it down, you know, down the tubes, essentially.
Right. And I know on your site you describe yourself as a child of like, I noticed too much, I felt too much.
Yeah.
Have you come across the work of Eileen Aaron, where she talks about like highly sensitive persons? Like, do you identify with that?
Oh, absolutely. I knew what people were thinking and feeling when I was 5 years old. And I knew when there was a difference between what you say, what you're saying and what you really mean.
Okay.
A lot of times, though, again, some of this, if you look at a lot of the research around trauma, which I do believe I have developmental trauma that I've recovered from just accidentally over the years, and plus now diving deeper into it, is that I think people can come in like just, kind of wired more sensitively, and then when stuff happens, when there's misattunements, then you get more empathic. And I think because you become hypervigilant.
Yeah.
Of trying to be right, do right, just to avoid danger. Essentially, it's like a survival response. So yeah, I would identify with that, and I imagine a lot of your audience would too.
Yeah. Do you want to? I don't know how much I've talked about this before on the podcast. Like, is this something you know a bit about that you're happy to talk about for a bit?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about. Yeah, I am. That was kind of my first foray a long time ago, probably 10 years ago. It's like, oh. I was that. Like, I read the book, and I'm like, oh, I'm not a freak. Something's not wrong with me. Like, a certain percentage of people are wired sensitively. And I kind of am the only more highly sensitive person in my family. And nothing else seems to really bother people than what I noticed. Like, oh, okay, I'm not screwed up. But it's just a part, at least part of my wiring. So, yeah, I can talk about it. And I teach a lot of clients about it, too, is that I think most people who struggle with eating issues have some on the spectrum of this as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if you have any questions about it. I'm happy to answer, like, what my observations are or what I've seen people experience or...
Yeah, so, I mean, for people who are listening who haven't come across this before, there's a thing called, like, highly sensitive person. Eileen Aaron wrote a book on the topic. Maybe I'm mispronouncing her name. And I think in the book she estimates that somewhere around about 20% of the population on her site. There's a test that you can do where it asks certain questions to give you a bit of an idea if that applies to you. If you just search highly sensitive persons test, it will come up. And the thing for me that you also just mentioned is, while she says it's 20% of the population, if I think of the clients that I work with and when I bring this up, it's got to be, 70, maybe 80% of the people that I work with who would identify as this, or if they're not completely identify with it, they're like, I think I'm sort of an edge case as part of this.
Yeah, Chris, I would say probably 90% of my clients would identify that way. I know in the book it talks a lot more about the sensory part of things, like clothes or music, whatever. And it can be some of that sensory processing stuff, but sometimes it's just the relational sensitivity that's the main issue.
Yeah.
So if you take that test and you're recognized, like, well, no, I mean, it's not really the sensory, like hearing, sight, touch. That doesn't seem overwhelming. It's just the emotional, like energetic. Like I can go in a room and I can sense in my body, like, okay, here are people who are more like kind of hiding away, and here are the people who have the power, and they can sense that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And what she talks about is that if that's identified early on and you're in an environment where you have parents who really nurture that and are able to be supportive to that, like how much of a real superpower that can be.
Right. It would be a gift, right? To know, like, I kind of know that, like, there's only so much space. You learn how to be better boundaried and less internalized hurt, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like, that you know that, like, that's not really about you. You just sense it. Doesn't mean that it's at you, though.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason or the point where it's more of a problem, which is kind of how you talked about it, if you are then growing up in an environment where there isn't that sensitivity to being able to talk about your emotions, or for someone to be quieter, or for someone to take longer to process things and not be seen as a negative, that then just becomes quite internalized, and what could be a real boon for someone becomes their real weakness.
Yes, and you'll see as we talk about some of the food and the interoception of eating, is that that all gets put away as like, not like, oh, like my emotions are too much and I'm too much for people. It's like this, I'm too much. And then it becomes this equal sign of I'm bad or something's wrong with me. And then that shame looping is pretty hard. When you go back to eat and eat enough, you're going to start to feel all that stuff. And, that's where people, I think, are, when they struggle in recovery or on and off diets, this is the dilemma I think a lot of people are struggling with. Yeah.
Because I think there's a certain neutrality to the fact that I feel more than other people. If that's just I just recognize that I'm more sensitive in certain situations. I can pick up things. I'm more empathic. I take on more of what is going on in the room. And that can be just neutral in terms of I just do this differently to other people. But it becomes a problem when that is pointed out as, okay, this is something bad. Like, you can't be doing this. And then you then have this extra layer of emotion on top of this that is like, okay, I shouldn't be feeling so intensely here. And that you're then trying to battle against what is really just your body's way of regulating.
That's right. That's right. And that's where you start to see, we start to talk about like the window of tolerance here in a little while, or polyvagal, is that like, if you're so filled up with like, okay, so I got to contain all this, that's extremely... It costs a lot of energy to do all that, to like kind of be a certain way, but inside be a certain way, and it's got to come out somewhere. Yeah. And that's, for me, that it came out through an eating disorder. For other people, it comes out through somewhere else, but it becomes like this faux window. We'll talk about it later, but it's just this adaptive strategy, really, to like the too much.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard other people then talk about it. It's then when you're able to restrict, and as you described, it's not even coming from a body image place, it's often coming from an anxiety place. Suddenly there's this numbness or this sort of pause or turning down of those emotions, and that can feel very freeing when it's just felt so overwhelming.
That's right. Oh, it was for me personally, and I think other people probably it works until it doesn't. It's like that numbness works well for a while, because physiologically, you've had some nutrition status on board for X amount of years in your life, hopefully. And so it works for a while. And that numbness is great. It's like the first time, it's like, oh, I don't care. This is great. But it makes your life so small that you don't realize what you're missing until you're too deep in, and like, oh, now I'm in a hole that I'm going to have to, this is going to be hard. And I think that we have this anticipatory, like, oh, this is going to be a lot. And you can't, it's not always cognitive or languaged, but there's this knowing like, oh, I got to go back through all that again and deal with that. I don't want to. So it takes a lot to take that first step a lot of times, to go back into the feeling zone.
Yeah, definitely. And so for you, so when did you start the restriction, and how quickly was it before you were in what people would describe as an eating disorder?
Gosh, let me think back. This is like 24, 25 years. 16, I started restricting, and it was like this kind of slow, and my thing was just calorie counting. I never had any other, some fat restriction too, but calorie counting and just trying to look as normal as possible, because I got the numb effect pretty quickly. So it's like, ooh, so how can I eat as little as possible to not care?
Yeah.
To not care about life, basically. And it came on pretty fast. So it's just kind of this year process of like restricting before people are like, oh, this isn't you. Because I quickly, if you have ever, anybody looked at the key studies, like, oh, I started getting side effects within 6 months. I was starting to lose my personality and, of course, lose menstrual function and all that kind of stuff pretty fast. Because I did think I don't want to be triggering, but, kind of cut back pretty quickly. And it lasted for a while until I sought treatment about into the second year of restriction. So it's one of those things that things happen pretty fast and dramatically for me.
Yeah.
So, by the midway through my senior year of high school, I was like starting recovery, and I had just started restricting the summer before I went to my junior year. So I would have been like, 17. And by the time I was just had turned 18, I just had turned, I'm trying to think how old. Yes, I guess I was 16 and a half, started restricting, and started the process of recovery at 18.
Sure.
So I don't know how many details you want to know about that, because I just don't want to be triggering, because some of it's kind of traumatic because I didn't have the greatest experiences. And it was really just like a battle of wills of like, I can't go back to that misery because if this is what treatment is like, I don't want to do it. So I'm going to get better.
And you talked about when you were restricting, there was that numbness that was obviously beneficial in the very short term. Was there other benefits that came with that made you keep doing it in terms of were you complimented from other people on your willpower, or was there any of that things that came with it?
A little bit at the beginning. You know, it's always like there's always a pro and con to things. The con of having eating disorder in a small area is that everybody knows you and knows kind of like what you're normally like. So my affect kind of outweighed like the initial compliment. So I didn't really get a lot of positive feedback for this. It was all either like disgust or concern from people mostly. And a lot of like, why are you doing this to yourself? So I got met with a lot of hostility, unfortunately, which made me kind of dig in more of like, well, then get out of my life, basically. So no, not a lot of positive about it. Initially at the beginning of like, oh, you have so much willpower, you're so great. I'm like, if you only knew like the misery this is, but I didn't at this time, the numbness was way outweighing like the benefit.
Yeah.
Because I needed the numbness more than I cared about what I look like.
Yeah. And I don't think hostility is ever a great thing or a motivator, but was there any benefit to that in the long haul, considering you sought treatment pretty early on? And I know from other clients when there's like, but everyone was telling me I was doing so well for so long and people were so proud of me when I was able to lose weight, etc., where they're now having to come up against all of that. Whereas for you, it sounded like you never really had any of those sort of positive, supportive comments that people were telling you about what your eating disorder was doing.
My experience with the recovery is everybody pretended like it wasn't happening. So I'm not really that sick. And like, as I got better, it was just like, everybody pretend like that's not happening either until you gain a certain amount of weight. Like, oh, well, you're healthy now. I'm like, did you have any idea what's going on in my head? So it's one of those like situations where you look normal now, but you're still working through all the emotional like upheaval and getting to know who you are again and leaving the identity of eating disorder behind. And, that's the work. And those are things that were just totally, and I understand people don't know what any of this is like unless you've been through it or you've educated yourself about it. So I was a pretty lone wolf in my own journey, to be honest, for a long time, because it's like it was so uncomfortable for so many people what I'd gone through. And I think it was such a mirror for a lot of people about like, what part did we have in this? And like, it was just too much for people, and it was kind of, for me, a recapitulation, like, you're still too much. Okay, you're sick, you're not sick, you're still too much. Yeah. And that was one of those things that made it hard for me to fully let go and do body acceptance. And this wasn't really a word back then, but it was like just to let myself be, let my body be where it needs to be, fully eat normally or do attuned eating. Because it's like, okay, well, I'm doing all this hard work and I look normal, but it's like I still feel so out of control internally. And the only time I felt in control, and AKA really what was numb and not feeling so much and having any positive anything, or it wasn't really like I didn't really want people's concern. I just wanted acknowledgement of like being a human and you have feelings, which is what I was really only after. Didn't get that. So I started to go back to kind of restricting. It's like, well, I can't be really thin because that's disastrous. So maybe I'll be really fit. And that actually triggered the exercise compulsion and the binge eating that I experienced, at the, more like the 19 to 22-ish range, basically. And that was the darkest times really that I had in my life, because it's like nobody knew, you look normal, you're doing all these socially acceptable cultural things by exercising a lot and eating normal in public, but nobody knew. I was like, when you're not around, I'm restricting and just binging my brains out. Yeah. One, because of deprivation, and two, because of just all of the emotional, like, I don't have a container for this. Yeah. I don't have a way to express it, because every time I tried to, I got shut down. So, and and I'm, it's, again, here we are. I'm here. It's one of those things that I think these are just the layers and the nuances that, unless we unpack, usually within safe company, it takes a long time to understand these things. And that's why I'm so adamant about the kind of work that you do and I do, is that, like, we need safe company. We need somebody who's like, I don't have to get it, but I can listen.
Yeah, definitely. And when you were going through this, was the message that you were getting that, like, full recovery is possible, or it was, this is something that's going to be a lifelong struggle? Like, how was the recovery journey sold to you?
Again, I know the thing, this will be interesting for people to hear that, who have all these different wonderful messages now. Back then for me, it was like gain weight, and the implicit unspoken message is like, and don't be a problem. Gain weight and you're fine. So I did that, but I knew that that wasn't true. And I think I just had this will in me to, like, I want to be normal. And now that I'm recovered, and it's almost like it kind of messes your brain a little bit around food a little bit. Because, again, it's like, we're still in diet culture, even though, like, it wasn't like a super overtly strong fat phobia message growing up. Looking back at what it just that it wasn't as intense as maybe things are now. It was just like, you weigh more, you just still got to fix that. And so going back to that message that I received when I was younger is like, oh, I still had that back in my brain, well, weighing more is a problem. So I never got a chance to normally develop and accept, like, different stages of development. I went from a teenager who kind of, like, skipped some years of development and growing into an adult body to, like, overshooting.
Yeah.
Because of recovery. I didn't know how to accept that. And again, I didn't have messages of, it's okay. You're okay. I kind of just had to figure it out of, like, well, I don't know. I had a hard time accepting the idea, like, you can't fully be done with this, because I really wanted to be fully done with this. So I just decided, well, I don't know how long it's going to take me. I don't know how much weight on my body I had to accept to be fully done. But I guess that's the journey. I just kind of, that's the message I had. It was my own, like, just, there's nothing here for me to, like, guide me and lead me. So, well, what do I want? Essentially, what do I want my life to look like? Because there weren't any strong messages. I mean, the only books I had read at that point were, I think, Janine Roth, Breaking Free from Emotional Eating, and I read Susan Cano's, which is a really, really great book. I don't know if it's a green book cover, and talked about set point, which, like, oh, okay, well, this makes some kind of sense, because there was a time in my life I was kind of sane around food and body, and I just accepted that I was a really short person. And there was a 50-50 shot. Either I'm going to be short and kind of wiry like my dad, or short and kind of round like my mom. I don't know. Probably one of those two options. I did accept that. I didn't know what it was going to be, because my brain was still spinning around using food and exercise and binging as emotion regulation, more so than even. But I thought it was about body and body image.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I'm speaking all around, because that's how confusing it is until you start to recognize, okay, we have to deal with, like, the cultural piece of, like, yeah, it is easier to recover in a culturally acceptable body, and there's privilege in that. And then over here, it's like this, but you still have to, no matter what you're going to be ultimately when you eat normatively, and if all systems are working well in your body, that really the only way to fully recover is to be good with what you're given, or your circumstances. There's some acceptance that has to happen for full recovery. And then the other piece is, like, learning how to feel happy, mad, sad, and afraid, and be able to navigate that.
Yeah.
And those are the two pieces that there's a bunch of other pieces, but if you had to just really distill it down, that's it. And I didn't know that those two things needed to be worked on. So it was a long journey of messing around and figuring it out and making lots of mistakes. And I did go back to that dietitian at some point and kind of go through some of that kind of stuff, and had some more supportive normative eating. But I never really fully got the emotional regulation piece until I started just to be around get out of my own house, get out of my own environment, and go off to college and work and meet some different kind of people. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to communicate emotionally very well. I see that being around other people. So, basically being in a relationship with good people helped me so much.
Yeah.
To learn, because I didn't really get that until I really joined therapy later in my 20s and all those kind of things. And by then I'd read enough books, and I can't remember all the books, but to emotions are just a normal part of life. They aren't some bad thing that you don't do.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to feel these things. It's okay. How you respond to them is what matters. But these were foreign things to me. I didn't know. I thought my job growing up, where I'm supposed to be, is work hard, don't be too much and feel too much of anything, and certainly don't express it. Otherwise, you're going to make me uncomfortable, so don't do it. That's all implicit. But when you didn't do that, you were met very quickly, with looks and, possible punishment.
Yeah. And it just the piece you talked about there with recovery being there's the food-based thing and the physiology side, but then there is the emotional piece to it. And I think that's, for me, what is often missing with recovery. There is just so much of a focus on if we just get the food in, if someone weight restores, and I'm using weight restores in inverted commas, that everything will be okay.
And that's the truth is that I struggled the most when I was weight restored.
Yeah.
That edge of okay, your body functions well now. And it's these tidal waves of everything that was making more sense from my childhood, making more sense from how I function in the world. It's oh my goodness, I don't know how to do any of this without restriction or without overexercising, without binging. No wonder it was so hard to let that go. It wasn't even a matter of letting it go. It was how much did I have to lean on that to get through something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why so much of my work is normative eating is super important. Yours too, Chris. It's just, if we're not doing this parallel process, so people don't have the right pieces in place as doing recovery, we do pieces of it and then we feel stuck and we're searching. And that's why I warn people within the first, it's a very loving disclaimer of when you start eating more, you're going to start feeling more. And that's going to make you want to run back to whatever it is you've been doing that. Of course, it's helped you.
Yeah.
But we're going to start naming that stuff right off the bat. So that it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but it's not threatening.
Yeah.
And you've got a space here that we're going to build a container here that's relatively safe enough to start to tiptoe here and keep the food going as well, and working on those pieces.
Yeah, definitely. And that is normal. I think I'm
so
constantly trying, when I work with people, I want to give you a reality of what this is meant to be like, not to scare you, but so that you're unthinking everyone else's recovery journey is different, or, if I'm doing this and I'm having these intense feelings, I must be doing something wrong and I need to find some other alternative way of doing it. It's no, this is what it's like. And I know it's uncomfortable and I know it sucks, but we're going to navigate our way through this. This isn't demonstrating you're doing something wrong.
Yep. Yeah. It's linking arms. Okay, let's go through the muck together, because it's going to be there. And it's like I said, reminding people that, and this is part of some of the polyvagal stuff, is we inaccurately, when we've had so much need to protect ourselves, as time goes by, we start to inaccurately neurocept, which is basically noticing inside that the sensations, let's say of hunger and fullness, or the sensations of emotion mean threat. And it's no, right now in 2019, that's uncomfortable. But it's not the same thing as right now you're going to get in trouble, or right now something bad's going to happen. I need you to join me right now in here, because it's not the same thing anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I want to go through the polyvagal piece in a moment, but I want to just come back to your recovery. So how long after you recovered did you then think, hey, I want to do dietetics?
Well, it's really interesting. I had this I don't know what kind of spiritual moment you want to call it, when I was first in recovery, of if I get this, like this moment, if I air quotes here, if I get this, then maybe I can help people someday. And it was almost like a thought. I was like 18, and that was a thought of like, no, I'm not going there. I didn't really have that strong intent. It was just, I want to have a life. I want to be who I am. And I just kind of went off living and getting more normative. And I don't want people to think like, oh, she recovered fully on her own. I didn't. It wasn't all with, I had some professional help on and off, and those pieces were integral. But a lot of it was like, I was just really blessed to like, I didn't share this piece, which was part of at 22 is I was in a really abusive relationship. Of course, I get into a relationship as soon as like, I get out of town, I'm still in anorexia, and date the first person I meet that was really narcissistic. Of course, sensitive people do, right? So they're really abusive, and I'm not making a joke, but it's just, it's a little bit cliche. But so I got out of that relationship, and immediately my symptoms reduced, probably like 50 to 75%, because I knew enough now about like restricting binging cycle just from my own observation of like, oh, when I don't eat carbs in the morning, what do I eat all night? Carbs and fat. I started to notice these things and like, okay, well, Trace, like, I'm scared crapless to like eat more carbs, but if I don't want to eat a whole roll of cookie dough at night, maybe I should try to eat some of that food in the morning. Let's see what happens. And within a couple of days that started working. I was shocked. Couldn't believe it. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So I was doing some of those experiments and doing some things on myself and I tried to remember back when I was a kid, look, I'm really lucky that, my mom I had 3 meals a day and snacks. There was no good or bad food. I mean, it was separate. It's like, here's food, and then here's the diet craziness that they did. But it was hardly eating, so it didn't almost count. So I had like a sense of like a plate with all the food on it. And I could do that. And so once I started not restricting carbs, I could do that. Got out of that relationship, and I met my now husband, forever ago, and just another experience of like, I was really seen, like for the first time my whole life of like, oh, you're weird and goofy and really sensitive and really intense about things and really care about everything. And that's cool. I'm like, what? Really? And so that was the linchpin that started turning everything. So I was 22 when I met him. And then friendship, turned to dating, then we got married, and, that was 2003 when we got married. And 2003 was the last time ever I had a thought of like, before, the getting married kind of thing. I'm like, I haven't restricted forever, but maybe it wouldn't be that big a deal to do one for my wedding because of pictures, blah, blah, blah. And I got 2 weeks in, started, being obsessive and binging again, like, nope, never can go back to this ever again. Yeah. So that was the last time. I did a whole video on this, like, my last diet ever. It lasted 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm over this. I'm gone, done. And I just realized it. So anyway, I had done my internship that 2003, 2004 year. And by the end of that, I recognized, like, I can't be a regular dietitian. I've got this license now. And the only thing I enjoyed was doing these rotations where I did counseling, because I am just not afraid of intensity. And everything else is a little boring to me, to be honest. So I got a clinical job as a dialysis dietitian, and I just started searching out in the area I lived in, like, is there anybody who treats eating disorders? And it was just that my thought, like, I've got to do this, because it was just drummed up like, you've got to do this, you can do this. I'm like, okay, guess I'm going to do it. And found a person and worked under mentorship with her for years and years and years. Worked with her for like 9 years. I was so lucky because the people who she was and who all her, she was a person who kind of ran with Carolyn Costin and Anita Johnson and all these kind of folks and their kind of style of counseling of really unpacking and relationship building and decoding the nuanced stuff. When you say, I feel fat, and you look at the whole picture of when they're feeling and look at the food and what's happening around the food. It's like, oh, you are telling me a story. Yeah. I really want to hear what's going on with this story here if I feel fat. And you get so much good stuff from like just reviewing a whole day of food without it being about the nutrients, which that's just important. Eventually us non-diet people do get around to like meal planning if you need it and nutrition changes if you need it. But it's really about like, what are we saying through eating or not eating? what are we saying through how we see our bodies, and if that's accurate or not, or what we think people think of it or not. So anyway, I learned that style, before there was other things, and that's all I knew. So I just jumped in the deep end after, just started seeing people of all kinds, shapes and sizes, different intensities of things since 2006, 2007. That's when all that started. It was just one of those things. I had a clinical job for a couple of years just to kind of pay the bills, and then do that, and then work for this person's private practice, and eventually transition out of a real job, basically. And I haven't had a real job since. So.
No. Was there any apprehension with you getting into eating disorders? I know you said like your last diet was 2 weeks before your wedding, and then you're like, I'm done with this. But was there any fear of, okay, maybe this could be potentially triggering, or being in that environment, maybe I'm not going to know how to set proper boundaries, or there's just going to be so much emotion coming up? Was there any of that?
No, I wasn't worried about. I had burned that bridge, Chris, and I don't know where that is. Eventually, all of us eventually just clicks, and you switch, and you're like, nope, done. And I know that's not everybody's story, and so I'm not minimizing that. Sometimes it's a little more of a slower, like you keep like unfolding, and new pieces keep coming. But the only thing I worried about at the beginning is like I didn't want to personally say the wrong thing to hurt somebody. That mattered to me so much. And I know my mentor was like, why are you, she was pretty blunt. She was like, why are you doing this? This is hard work. And I said, I just love people, and I don't want people to suffer alone as long as I did, because it was a living hell. And that's how so for me, it's like every person that came in that I wasn't quite sure exactly how to navigate a situation or what they needed, I was just adamant to like, okay, so I just need to learn some more skills. I need to practice it. So let's do it. So who does that really well? And I'm going to go search them out, and I'm going to learn. So that's just kind of been my mentality of like, it's not that I didn't have fear. I mean, the first 2 years I did this work, I was shaky and vomity like all day long, because I could I could compartmentalize it, because I didn't want to screw them up, because I knew I've been there. I've been where like clinicians, when they haven't done their own work, they're not educated enough, say the wrong thing, and it can be devastating, or misattuned to something. So I cared about that so deeply that, it was kind of overboard, to be honest, looking back. But it's like, that was where my boundary crossing of like, I tried not to work harder than anybody who came to see me. But there was this thing that I really cared. I really cared about your freedom. Yeah. And that would cause me suffering, basically. Like taking things home and thinking about it a lot. And that was my main struggle. And, frankly, learning, with the highly sensitive thing, it did take me a while to have these emotional, energetic boundaries of not feeling like totally drained by the end of the day. And it wasn't because anybody else did anything wrong. It was because I was just taking on emotionally, like a lot of stuff. Because I didn't understand all that highly sensitive stuff yet, because I hadn't named it. Like I knew I was sensitive, but didn't know that it was just stuff that I knew. Like I could assume I could come in and I could know like how they're doing, even if they said fine. But if they like, oh no, I'm fine. I'm like, but you're not fine. I can feel your sadness. So being able to like know how to ask the right questions, I hope people get to that without saying that I know that you're sad, because that's not appropriate.
Sure. And also from what you're describing, having the other flip side of that, which is you knowing how to do the self-care piece to look after yourself because of having that superpower, that there is a drawback.
That's right. If you don't have the self-care piece, and I was still learning. So again, I started this work in I was 27, 28. So I only been like a really hard, like really like settled, solid, intuitive eater, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So a good bit of time before I started to work, but not forever, right? Yeah. And I had re-entered when I started this work. I'm like, okay, so there are going to be experiences that I know that I don't have. I don't have everybody's experience of being a different size, different color, different whatever. So let's get in therapy and just learn how to look for my blind spots. And when people bring this up, like, what that means for me and about me, what I want to say about it, blah, blah, blah. So I did a lot of that, and that started teaching me like the self-care I needed to like, really, really be in it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the other thing that's coming up, considering the path that you went so quickly after studying, if you had your time over, would you have studied, I don't know, psychology instead of becoming a dietitian?
I think if I would have had a good experience in therapy when I was young, I would have.
Yeah.
Looking back, I always ask that question. Now, at this point, I don't want to be a therapist because I get to do so much good body, more body-based regulation work now that I don't have to be. I can let the therapist do their job and be in my lane, and it's good because I can work with the body. But probably I would have if I would have had a really good therapy experience. And this whole conversation, and you're probably feeling the same way, Chris, is non-knocking therapists. There's so many good ones. They help so many people. It's just the luck of the draw. I got a pretty rough one. Yeah. That didn't understand and didn't really try to understand. It was just very analytic, and I'm not a super analytic person. I need a relationship, and I didn't get it.
Yeah. And I've had conversations with people who had terrible dietitians but had really good therapists. So you got one. You got one out of that.
Well, and the thing is, she was my third. So they are, it was one of those things. The first one was I was being a really petulant teenager. I'm like, lady, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're talking to. I know more. And I was a brat. But she just telling me to, add this or that to make shakes. I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't even eat yogurt, let alone put yogurt in a smoothie with a bunch of other stuff. You're jumping way too far ahead. But I understood. So it's like that. And then the second one, when you come into your dietitian with a 3-page front and back list of questions about nutrition, you kind of scare people off. So my third one ended up being the good one that really, and I say good one, knew how to hold space for all that fear and give me choice of how this was going to go. And once that happened, my whole body settled, and I could feel oh, she's not scared off by me. I'm not too much. I'm okay here. Yeah. And that's all I needed. I flourished just in that little bit.
Yeah. Because I do, obviously she had to have the right skills to be able to do that, but there's something that needs to be said about how important the client-patient relationship or the practitioner-client relationship is. Mm-hmm. And that accounts for so much of what is the good that comes out of it in terms of someone's ability to make changes, or someone's ability to follow through, or someone's willingness to reach out when they're in a struggle and trust that you're going to be able to, as you say, hold space, or to be able to just guide them through that place.
Yeah, we're humans, and I know we need food and water and oxygen and shelter and sleep. If we don't have those things, we're going to die in a short period of time. But above that, we do need we need a connection. We're mammals. We need connection. We're social creatures, and I don't see too many people that just fully recover just all on their own, don't have any connection with anybody who's safe and good and affirming and can lovingly hold you accountable to where, your distortions are, or where you're trying to have it both ways, and it doesn't quite work that way. And we need that container, there's I call it containment. I need help with my food in the containment of I can make mistakes, I can challenge things, I can not want to do something, but I'm not going to get in trouble for it, but eventually get there anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, that's been one of the things that I've learned through doing this for sort of over a decade. Originally, so much of my focus was I've got to learn more about physiology or how the body works or this technique or whatever, and so much more now is around how to be in the room properly with someone, and how to sit with someone, and I've noticed that side of things has just helped so much more, and a lot of my nutritional knowledge is probably atrophied because I'm just not spending the time there.
That's right. Yeah.
But I don't need to in so many of the situations.
Chris, I love you're saying this, because it's I always disclaim that when I'm working with new dietitians and coaches, nutrition is important, but you're going to use at the very end maybe, because really nutrition, being able to be your own nutrition expert, you don't need a degree and you don't need a ton of knowledge. need a lot of body wisdom, and you need to know how to be with yourself. So our job is to help them learn how to be with themselves.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're describing it beautifully. Is like, and I always look at like, well, how did our relationship with food and body get screwed up? It's all relationship with our culture, our environment, like how much we're seen and heard for who we are. And that is going to either positively or negatively impact like how we take in something so intimately as food.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
so I feel like the relationship screws things up. Well, maybe a really good one will heal.
Yeah. Or the kind of the other one that screws it up, or that comes to mind when I'm thinking about that, is the delving into wanting more nutritional knowledge. Like the idea that more knowledge in this realm is going to be the thing that saves me.
That's right.
Which often just leads to more confusion and more disconnect from being able to listen to their body, because you now have all of these ideas in your head about what should be right and what you should be doing, that just pushes you further away.
We call that bypass, right? It's like, I'm going to bypass my body and be in my head and get out in front of it. That's a very sympathetic part of your nervous system response to like if I know enough, you can feel the energetic, if I know enough, then I can feel better. But you're not using any body wisdom to help yourself feel better. It's all not intellectual knowledge. So it's like, it's great, and you can use it to like make some choices, but those choices still have to be based on like, what is your body asking for?
Yeah, definitely. So cool. At the top of this, you talked about being a somatic nutrition therapist. Yeah. So let's focus on the somatic part of that. What does that term mean?
Well, somatic just means of the body. So, I just use that because there are so many modalities that are basically body-based, all kinds of body-based psychotherapy techniques and schools, and, whether it's somatic experiencing or sensory motor psychotherapy, or, oh my gosh, there's so many. So, you and I can come together and make a list for people if they want to explore some stuff. But I wanted to use the body more. And the reason I did this, so this goes back to my work with clients, is that there were so many people that I felt like I was helping. So we would, make sure you're getting, well nourished enough to where you can have accurate signals on hunger and fullness, and unpack like I feel fat moments, and what do like food not actual like food allergies or whatever stuff means, but like food avoidances and emotional eating experiences, what all that stuff means. So just really directly with the food and the body image stuff. I'm doing all this work, and for a big majority of people, that's enough. They're working with me, and hopefully, probably a therapist too, and we're doing this good work, and they kind of graduate and move on. It's awesome. And then there were a set of people that's like, I knew they had a trauma history because they usually share that with me pretty soon, like in the first session or two. But it's like I wasn't getting the connection that like trauma's in the body. It's not just a set of things, thinking and memories and feelings maybe that are driving feelings. It's like, no, it's in the body. It's this body experience that was like that. What would a normal like escape response, and didn't get to happen from the bad stuff. So it's stuck in the body and the nervous system. I didn't know that at the time. So this is like 2011. And it's not a coincidence. My daughter was born, and it just, something clicked to me, and like, oh my gosh, like these clients that are really struggling with, like, they know some stuff, but then I'm noticing that like something will happen, or maybe something won't happen. It just feels out of the blue. And there's just this major disconnect from everything they know. And it's almost like there's this other thing that shifts in place where they're back in this like white knuckling with trying to restrict, or there's graze eating happening, or binging happening, and it hadn't in weeks or months. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I just started to like, something's different here with their ability to like keep going with what they know works.
Yeah. And
I had a colleague mention the word somatic experiencing, and I'll bring my daughter into it in a second, why this is kind of relevant. And she mentioned the word somatic experience, and I don't know why. Again, it's one of those moments where it's like, that's it. You got to know about this, because that's what's missing here. This is the missing, I felt it was the missing piece in recovery work for people. And some people need a lot more than others. So this is 2011. And I just started reading all the books. And then I found my first mentor and worked with him for a couple months. And his name is Raphael Kushner. He's not even a licensed person. He was just somebody who studied it too, but long before I did, and had these basically techniques to help people like feel the flinch and learn how to ride the waves. And so I started learning that, and read all the Peter Levine books and taken lots of courses, and studied all kinds of different people over the years. And I think it's one of those things, as we know, we we start teaching what we need to heal. And so after my daughter was born, I started having all these body experiences of like being really revved up, and then I would shut down. And I was like two parts of me, so there's like this part of me who's really competent doing work. And the whole time I'm feeling like I'm revved up and like my chest is full of like, I wouldn't even label it as anxiety. I would label it as like whatever hot lava adrenaline feels like, might look like in my body, like from my rib cage up all the time. It's just constantly there. And just having, all these body experiences. And I started reading all this work around how our bodies have all this stored stuff. And I would have different experiences based on different times of development with my daughter. From my 0 to 3 was my really difficult times with my own, just like, self-care and being revved up, and then I would be so tired I couldn't get out of bed, and I could just work, take care of her, and then go back to bed. And this was my life like 3 years. And I started reading about like, what is hyperarousal, like being locked up in your sympathetic, and then what is hypoarousal, which is being kind of functionally frozen. And I started to put the pieces together with implicit memory, which is like our body remembers stuff that you might not have stories for. And I'm like, oh, this is what this is. I've had a lot of misattunement probably in these ages my daughter's going through right now, and my body remembers. I didn't remember. And I didn't really experience that directly until I had this life trigger, which I think is what triggers a lot of people's eating disorders. What I think triggers a lot of people with relapses is all this unmetabolized stuff. And so, I went into trauma therapy. So I was 32. I'm 41 now. And all, just basically work with a whole lot of somatic therapy practitioners, people who had different kinds of trainings as well, and just learned how to integrate this stuff, what needed to be integrated, and what needed to like be done with. And it's an unfolding process of growing your window of tolerance. We can talk about what that means in a second. But anyway, I started like everything I learned personally, of course, and all the trainings I started taking, and all the, I probably worked with a half a dozen different professionals that some people might know of, some people don't know of, and just like these year spurts of like, all right, this is what I'm noticing in my own body, this is what I'm noticing in clients' bodies, let's role play this, let's work through it. What's happening in the physiology, and what is this speaking to? And then what can I do as a nutrition part of the puzzle? And then being able to like, okay, here, therapist, here you go. What's coming up through all the food stuff, what the food is saying, what does it mean when we don't know what we want? And this is some of the work of Rachel Lewis and Paula Scatoloni of the Embodied Recovery Institute, and they're in North Carolina. And they really work on an action cycle of when we're struggling with knowing what we need to eat or how much we need, for reaching for it, from being able to ingest it, and then like rest and digest essentially. All of those different phases can have barriers. And I started looking at like where people were struggling. They knew everything in the world about intuitive eating. They knew everything in the world about health at every size. It was all, they believed in it. But I was starting to help people, okay, and so your mind knows better, but your body's like, I'm not there yet. I need to keep this part of things and this part of my life for survival purposes, please, and thank you, leave me alone. And basically everything we've talked about today is, about bringing that container and start to work with the body to feel a little more safe or a little less scared. Sometimes we can't find safety yet, but we can feel a little less scared. And so helping people who have developmental trauma and other kinds of things that just, they know about it, but not understanding quite how much still stuck in the body and how that is impacting hormone fullness, is how I got to here today, is like, talking to you and helping people understand that like knowing is really important, but without safety, it's going to be hard for people for all this stuff to really stick.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to help you with.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're describing there as well seems to touch on the polyvagal theory and polyvagal that I mentioned at the top and that we briefly touched on. So why don't we just spend a bit of time focusing on this?
Yeah.
And so
you go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry,
yeah. So I was just going to say, like, what does the word polyvagal mean? And then we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, polyvagal means poly's many, and our vagus nerve is just this giant nerve that innervates, from our brain down through our, like this, the hole in the back of your neck, and it goes all the way down, and it innervates pretty much everything. And it's a part of our survival system. And I'm not a polyvagal theory expert. If you want, please, anybody, go look up Stephen Porges, because he's the guy. Yeah. I just, like you, Chris, I know enough to explain it, but there's so much that I don't understand that, I don't want to pretend. But I think why it's helpful for us to talk about the little I do know is that basically polyvagal means that in our survival system, we can overcouple normal experiences as either being good or being threatening. And when you've been in too many experiences, oh gosh, yeah, let's just use diet trauma. So if you've been a kid and constantly going to the doctor and saying you better watch out and don't drink this and don't do that, and you're like, but I don't overeat, but you keep telling me my body's wrong. One, you're going to start to have a really uncomfortable, scary, I don't want to be criticized reaction to doctors in general. That's going to start to be wired in your system from a young age. But it's also this belief that the certain foods are dangerous because I might get criticized. I might be unacceptable if I do those things. Or if my body gets bigger, that means I'm not okay. So we have this, it was somebody's real experience. So it was a threat then when we were 5 or 10 or 16 or 20 or whatever. But as we get adults, we have different resources than we do as kids to survive and to get through. So it's a whole lot easier to blame yourself for being wrong versus the adults who, if you don't have adults, you're probably screwed. You have to have adults to survive when you're a kid. So you kind of have to either align with them and basically deny yourself. Deny your autonomy, what you want to eat, deny maybe who you are and feel good about that. And you have to make yourself wrong to get along. And so how that goes with polyvagal theory is that these thoughts and feelings then become in your nervous system your foundation. So, when you start to learn about, let's say, health at every size or intuitive eating, and you're like, yeah, that's right, that makes so much sense. We are born to have these bodies that eat and get hungry and get full, and we satisfy that, and then our bodies assimilate and digest and eliminate, and that's normal. That should be a normal process because we did that as babies and infants, hopefully, normally. But the experience of eating what you wanted was also a threat because if your body gets too big, you might get in trouble, or you might get criticized, or you might not feel loved. And so eating maybe is a threatening thing. You do it because you have to, but not too much. And you start to kind of distance yourself from what you really want or you really need. Or you might eat, but you can't, I call it yield. I'm eating, but I'm standing running around as I'm eating because I don't want to fully have the awareness that I'm eating because that would be too painful because then all those bad things might happen again.
Yeah. And the way that I've kind of conceptualized it with the term neuroception is we have a nervous system that detects things within our environment. And it does this outside of our conscious control and without and at a much quicker rate. And so the easy thing that most people have experienced is walking along some track somewhere and instantly jumping because out of the corner of their eye they saw a stick that they instantly thought was a snake, and then on closer inspection it was a stick, but they've already had that reaction.
That's right.
But the problem with this is it's when you come to, you look at that stick and you still see a snake. Is that you're able to you're not able to then be able to like, oh, okay, cool, I made an error there. You're still stuck in this place where what is essentially something that is non-harmful is still seen as a threat.
Right, that's right. So to explain it a little more, and just so people know where the physiology is when I talk about so we've got different branches of this autonomic nervous system, which is the vagus, the big vagus nerve. And so you got your sympathetic. We've all heard of fight or flight. Well, there's more to it. So there's your fight or flight is your sympathetic response. And we need that. Like Chris said, like if you're walking in the forest, your body is naturally going to keep its head on a swivel without you knowing it about if I'm in bear country, I know in the back of my mind is there, so I'm a little more attuned. It has our senses ready to either run or fight, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. We don't want not to have that. The problem is in our culture of being hyper vigilant about our weight or what people think about us is that's always on, and that's not the greatest place physiologically to be. It basically is going to wear us out.
Yeah.
So what happens is, so you have your sympathetic, and we have our parasympathetic, and people think that's all there is. That's rest and digest. Well, it is, but there's two branches to it. So we have our ventral vagal, which is basically, imagine, our higher functioning, which is our problem solving and our emotional regulation and our social engagement system, like I'm connecting with you. And that innervates our face and our ear, eyes, heart, lungs. And then below the diaphragm is something called a dorsal vagal. And that's the part of the shutdown that we're all familiar with. If you spend too much time at some point in your life in sympathetic, eventually, you're going to shut down, which is that feeling of just checked out. If it's more intense, it's dissociation. Or it could be that feeling of you're driving home, but you don't know how you got there. There's a little bit of that going on. You're I've been up so much all day, and you got my car and you kind of miss this window of alertness, which I'll talk about what that means in a second. But so basically, you've got three main parts that are running the show. Now that when we have more, it's not like a on or off. It's they're all kind of feedback loops, and they're all kind of running at the same time. But when you've got too much variability is when you find those symptoms of I'm really, really anxious and my brain's spinning and I can't shut that off. And that might be food rules or obsessive compulsive stuff, or just anxiety about eating, to the bottom part at the bottom where it's I can't, I'm overriding fullness, and I never really notice I'm full until I get over full. Or maybe I'm eating to feel something, or I'm eating to juice myself up, essentially, when I'm not hungry. All those kind of things would belie that we're kind of in some dorsal. But the ventral vagal, which basically, if you're what does all this stuff mean? It really just means the more we're in a safe relationship, which is, why it's a good idea you listen to these podcasts and see Chris or see me, is that you build a more robust ventral vagal window of tolerance, which is I can be present and calm and alert. And that's where really clear signals of hunger and fullness are. They really aren't up when we're in fight or flight or when we're shut down. And that's what I really, when I work with clients, is really trying to teach them there are differences inside yourself when we're up or we're really down versus in that middle zone. And in that middle zone doesn't mean I never have any problems or I don't feel emotions. Is that we have capacity to I notice I'm really angry and my hunger fullness signals are relatively still pretty clear, if that makes sense. We have more room to hold all this, essentially, versus if something feels out of our capacity to deal with, then we go into our survival responses. Either I rev up or I shut down.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. So I don't know if that was helpful to explain.
No, it was one of the things I wanted to chat about. So yeah, but I might just say it again just so people understand. There are three different options. There's the safe place where you're sociable, where you're calm, where kind of you want to be spending the majority of your life. And then when there is danger, it can either go into danger, fight and flight, Or it can go, this is so life-threateningly dangerous, I'm going to just go into the freeze, immobilized response, which is what we see with certain animals in the wild when they're being hunted down. And it's also what we see in certain situations around trauma. If we're looking at extreme examples where people are like, oh, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you run away? And someone is just completely immobilized because of their nervous system and how they perceive that threat. Right.
And I want to also add that, like, it's not always that we shut down, it's that we can go into these feigned responses to, like, people pleasing. And I think that shame lives down here too, where we're chronically, it's like this, it's almost like you don't even have to know the science to know what this feels like. We know what, like, anger, like really ragey and anxious feelings feel like. It feels really up. It feels really up and big, or it's really mobilizing and you want to act. When we're down more in this potential, like, there's nothing else works response, it's like there's a lot of chronic shame there, and there's also people pleasing there too. Like, well, just it feels heavy, I don't really want to do this, but I gotta do it, and it feels kind of anxious, but it's almost like a acquiescence kind of place. So I just gotta do this thing, and that's why sometimes you see people bopping up and down so much. Like, they're really, that was my experience growing up. Like, I never stopped being productive and doing stuff, and at the same time had a lot of this, like, inner just self-hatred. And so that I can look back and, like, I didn't really have a very big window.
Right.
I was, like, up and down, and physiologically that's exhausting.
Yeah. And so with the work that you're doing with clients, are you obviously talking through this piece, and so that they know, okay, there's these three different places, and then getting them to understand where they, like, when they are in those different different places, and what maybe triggers them to go up into, I don't know, from a fight and flight type place to more of a social safe place, or from a fight and flight place down to a collapse place. Is that some of the stuff you talk about?
I do, and it's probably not in the first 2 or 3 sessions, but I do mention that we want to bring more safety into the body. So as that comes up in the right time and the work together, it's basically right off the bat describing, really even more short than we did when we just did, that we've got these three, there's 3 options, but there's sub-options within the options, of course.
Yep.
And then, and I'm already blanking, which is making me really sad about, because so Stephen Port is Polyvagal Theory, but, oh gosh, no, my brain's not going to work. A really great book to learn more about window of tolerance is the book Nurturing Resilience by Kathy Kane and Steve Terrell. And I've gotten so much from that book in the last couple years about just helping people track that. And also the book that I've talked about, Chris, which is from Deb Dana, The Polyvagal Theory and Therapy. It's very user-friendly. There's lots of really great worksheets in there that people can start to track their own nervous system. And because there's a lot of things within recovery that some things trigger some people and some things don't, that you think would be really triggering. And it's because there's not, like, this overcoupling that doesn't, like, drive them into feeling like this is a threat response. So, so I start having people I first just actually have people, if they're able to do hunger fullness work, if their bodies are well nourished enough to do it, and there's some food stability, and there's been some containment, there's not so much chaos, is that once we start doing that, if you're having a lot of chaos, I start doing some of this regulation work right off the bat. But if they're starting to notice, like, sometimes their signals are really accurate, and sometimes I'll look at people's food and, like, I wonder where your hunger was, because it's been a long while, and I'm just really curious what was happening. They we explored their experience, and they were just super revved up. So of course, their hunger was a little numbed out, because when you're in sympathetic, the body's drive is for mobilization, not for digestion.
Yep.
So you're not going to have as accurate signals of, like, you might have a faint idea that you're kind of hungry, but, your heart rate might be being noticed so much. You're so mentally focused on the thing because this thing's going to be turned in 2 seconds, that there's so much energy mobilized for the outward doing that inwardly it's happening. Our energy is just displaced. We're not noticing it as much. So this information is really important. So you can see like, oh, when I'm in these circumstances, I get revved up. So what do I need in general in life to help my body feel safer even when things are challenging? So I'm not quite as revved up. And maybe my hunger and fullness is just a little more accurate, or at least I know that like this is a trigger for me. And honestly, maybe in 6 months to a year, it's less of a trigger and then less of a trigger. And before long, you got a really big window of tolerance where it's like, yeah, I got to turn that thing in 2 seconds, but I trust myself, my own competence. And you're able, if your window's bigger, you have more access to like a bunch more information like intellectual, experiential, to where like you can lean on those resources versus like it's all or nothing.
Yeah. And I think for me, I will do hunger and fullness with people as soon as I can, but with the caveat of your ability to hear and notice things may be off. And part of the reason is just you're in more of a stress response, or you've been under eating for so long and ignoring your hunger for so long, your body just doesn't want to produce the chemicals to make you hungry because it doesn't think you're going to listen, and it's just a waste of calories.
That's
and
right.
So it's not that I shouldn't start there with someone. It's just like, okay, this is going to probably be a little bit fallible, and let's look at like, when are you getting better feedback and when are you not? And what are the patterns that you start to notice through this?
Beautiful.
And as opposed to it being like the sole determiner of when someone can and can't eat, it's just like it's a helpful tool. It's one of the things you can pay attention to.
That's right. And I'm thinking of a client in particular that really struggled just very habitually at certain times of the day, and food would be going well. And this would be a person like you're describing, like, long history of restriction, but doing really darn well, even though there's still some renourishment that needs to keep happening. So she happened to be a person where her signals were accurate. There just was still some denial of fully getting needs met, but regardless. But we noticed the body would really get revved up at night. And so we spent a lot of work on working. Well, so mostly hers was like sympathetic. So like basically if you're going to fight or you're afraid, what does the body need? What is it saying? Well, if I'm afraid, what do we usually want? We need some comfort, or we need some relief, or we need a solution. And so just trying to give the body in those circumstances to get really in the current moment of the circumstance. If it is safe, great. Can you actually orient to that and then bring whatever physicality to your senses you need, whether it's a weighted blanket on your lap during the meal, whether it's like, the list goes on and on of some things that we could do in terms of like taking more time. Maybe you need some movement to burn off some of that adrenaline, not exercise, but it could be as simple as like jumping on a little trampoline or doing 10 jumping jacks enough to burn off some of that adrenaline to like get here.
Yeah.
And remembering, oh, that's right, dinner time with my family isn't a threat. The body's not quite there yet of like consistently knowing that's true. We just have to help it.
Yeah, definitely. And this then comes back into the work around neuroplasticity and neural rewiring, that just because you've for a long time identified something as a threat doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be for now and forevermore. The more you can do that and demonstrate to your body, like, this guy didn't fall in, I was able to survive this situation, the more the body is then able to learn, like, okay, cool, this isn't a threat, or this is no longer a threat. That's right. So we're teaching the body. It's not even that I always remind clients, because we get in this like self-judgment mode of, why don't I get this faster? It's not your brain. That's like, it's not like when you're with me, calm and alert, and we're learning, or we're doing some good work here. I know your adult mind knows that, but there's some point in time here in your neurobiology that's like, family meals mean X, Y, Z. And we're just trying to teach your body that those times aren't there more and more and more, to where it's like your body is here. Yeah. And you might have a mental memory of stuff, but it being stuck in your nervous system as truth is no longer there. Yeah. That's why I love this work, because it's like, it's so hopeful that no matter what you've been through, it takes as long as it takes sometimes, but you can rebuild a whole new, well, not just relationship with food, but just way of being in all kinds of situations that
were once feeling really hard, and you thought it would be this way forever. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah. And one of the things I have noticed with clients is one of the signs, or at least one of the times where it does seem to get better a little quicker, is once they can start to sleep properly. Because in the beginning, if someone's been restricting for a long time, or there's been over-exercising for a long time, often clients are like, I sleep terribly, or I fall asleep instantly, but then I'm awake at 2 a.m. in the morning, and then I can't get back to sleep, etc. And sleep is when your body is doing so much of the repair work, and like physical repair work, but also the mental repair work. So it's often that when clients get to a place that they're sleeping better, it's amazing how much their perception of the world just starts to change. And I know this myself anyway, from having a small child and not getting sleep, and knowing how much I see the world differently when that is the case. But from a threat standpoint, and the things that they used to be really fearful of and now are no longer, it can almost feel like they just start to vanish, where there's like, I don't understand why I feel differently about this. Like, there's no experience that I can connect this to of why this is now better. It just is. And when I look through, sleep is often the thing that connects that.
Yeah, so lovely. Thank you for mentioning that. So whichever mode of how they get to more sleep, whatever interventions we use or they come up with or whatever, there's a level of the less threat response that you have, the probably better likely you are to sleep. The better are you to sleep, the more you can repair some threat response. So it all goes together. Yeah.
And so what are some of the ways that you help people build their resilience or their window or their ability to regulate? And I know in the Deb Dana book, they talk about things that someone can do on their own and then things that people can do with others. But are there certain things that stand out for you that, these tend to work a lot with lots of clients?
Yeah. And so I really try to keep it with the different realms of like food and our personal relationship and movement and body image. And so the things that just work, I think, consistently for all of us is this sense of something having our back. So, for example, this is a really simple thing I have all my clients do. Sometimes, not at the beginning of every session, but most, is simply like noticing the contact that our feet are making with the ground. And not just like, okay, I feel my feet on the ground, but really, here's you and here's the ground. And what's that like to have something like holding you up? And then the same thing with our chair, seat. Where do they make contact? And what's that like to have something like, again, will you be there for you? And then lastly, their back, which for me, like the feet and the back are so powerful. It's like if we just give a little push back in the back of our chair and notice that contact where it's like, here's my back and here's the chair and the different points we're touching. What's it like? Or even how new is this for you to have something to have your back? And most of the time for all of us, it's like, whoa, either that's new, or I don't get that enough, or this is nice.
Yeah.
And even something as simple as, it starts as simple as that sometimes.
Yeah, sure. And sorry to interrupt, but it was even as you were doing that, it just forces you to slow down and pay attention. It's the same way as if anyone ever mentions to me breath, or if I'm reading the word breath in a book, like I notice how much more I suddenly take in a deep breath and I'm then focused on my breath. And to be in that place is definitely moving you more towards the parasympathetic and the better side of the parasympathetic if we're talking more of that safe social place.
Yeah. And it gives us a starting point for like, if this feels good, wow, this is a resource. So you can use this. You don't need me for this. And it's nice to have that co-regulation of somebody helping you through it. But that even builds a body memory. So when you do it with me, then when you're in your car on your way to drop the kids off or to a meeting, is this something you can do? And I think, the more we make this a part of our life, like I spend all day long regulating myself with clients because I'm doing this and I do it separately, and I can feel myself if I get revved up or getting kind of tired. And it's not too much anymore because I've done this, I've been working on this for like 8 years now, but it builds. Everything builds and builds and builds. So it's not like a thing you're going to notice, ooh, this is so great over 2 weeks, but you'll look back over months and years and like, there are things that just don't bother you that always just habitually bothered you, that felt like too much. Another thing I do is just talk about, like, if you're in more of those up places. So your body is saying, like, there's too much here, or there's not enough. So either not enough safety or resource, or there's just too much in my system and I need to get out of here, or I got to fight my way out. And sometimes it's hard to get to the story of it or the intellect of it when we're so revved up. So it's got to go two either ways. It's either a way we need comfort and containment. So that might be, sounds kind of funny, but a pillow fort, or the weighted products, or warmth, like on your kidneys. Like if you don't have a heating pad or a hot water bottle, you can simply put some rice in a sock and microwave it, and put that on your kidneys or on your neck or somewhere you can feel it. And this helps in a couple ways. It's one, it's hard to imagine feeling some soothing when you're running from a tiger. You can't do both. Either you're running or you're feeling this sensation. That's enough of a signal to your body, like, it's okay, we can slow down. Or like I said, it's safe enough to slow down. It's that, or sometimes if you're so revved up, I've had times in my life where I was so revved up that nothing worked except for just lay on the floor and let myself work through all that, like, let it flow through. Or it's almost like if you've ever had a vehicle that was revving, and nothing worked except for if you just hit the gas. And what that would look like practically is like do 10 jumping jacks, or sprint from here to your mailbox. That's 5 seconds, whatever that is, enough to punch that sympathetic downshift a little, and then use your other tools, or hopefully if you can do this with somebody else, it's even more comforting and supportive. But those are some simple things to actually, like, oh, I'm hungry now. Like, yeah. It's like we knew it was there. We just, like, that other piece was just so revved up, or not in the way, but just doing its thing. It's thinking to protect you, that eating would feel like white knuckling at the time. And there's only so long you can white knuckle. Or not eating at the time could feel like white knuckling. Yeah.
And so with someone, because this is fairly new for me, or at least new exploring in this level of detail, and for me reading the Deb Dana book. So when you're working with someone fairly early on and they're struggling with an eating disorder, and it's maybe kind of at the more extreme end of things, mm-hmm. How, like, are they experiencing times where they are getting out of that sympathetic fight and flight mode very much, or it's pretty much mm-hmm. like that doesn't happen till later on? The more I just go for it and try things with people early on, it's some people, it's like they wouldn't have gotten out of their dysregulation. Like I think of a case, a person I have, and all the worst traumas you can think of, and adding trauma to this is being in a higher weight body with anorexia. And there's nothing else I could do for her. She couldn't eat. She couldn't keep food down. I mean, her system was so dysregulated at the beginning that her only ways of feeling not up were self-harm, restricting, and purging to come down. And so I had no choice. I had to do this with her to help food get in. Otherwise, she was going to be hospitalized like any second from just malnutrition. And which was an option, but she didn't want to do that. Like, well, this is the work we're going to have to do then. And that started probably almost 3 years ago. That much complex trauma, that much dysregulation. And I don't think if I would have done things traditionally, like I had done in the past, that she would have not been outpatient. And she had a good trauma therapist too, and we had a really good team and had enough support. But I look back on that, and I would not have had, and without this, I would have done things differently with her than I would have done 14 years ago. I would have, like, here's your meal plan, let's get more food in, and just rely on the relationship. Yeah.
But now I have, like, the relationship, educating her, and really learning how to track her nervous system to teach her how to do it, So she could notice when she was revving up, and she could notice when dissociation was coming and use something else to anchor her in now. So the results can be pretty amazing. And just done consistent, like week after week after week. And that's something that even was very, if you're in a complex situation, this can be done.
Yeah. And you talked about something before, and I think you mentioned it when you did some course. I can't remember which one you were talking about. And you said there's different stages where people can get tripped up in terms of making food choices. And one of them was like being unsure when reaching for food, or that indecision. Mm-hmm. And that's something that comes up a lot for clients. So what have you, what insights have you got on that?
Yeah, so I highly recommend that if anybody ever gets a chance to train with Paula Scandaloni and Rachel Lewis, again, I learned, I was kind of putting the pieces together before I went to their training. I started working with them, it's been a year and a half ago, around just like the really detailed, nuanced pieces of what's happening. It's not even just with the polyvagal. It's really just like our developmental feeling, like we know how to know what we want. So let's say one person that I don't know what I want to eat. That's saying that we don't have enough push. Like we don't have enough push like within ourselves, that it's safe for me to be out there in the world. And so it's almost like if it doesn't feel safe to be out there with my needs and how I feel and what I want, there's a level of like what we've learned to survive is why try? Why even pay attention to what I want, because it's not going to get met anyway, or what I want isn't okay. And so basically that gets all scrambled up with food choices. It's like when you're first allowed to eat anything, let's say with intuitive eating, it's like I don't really know what I like or I want because I've spent so much time eating what I needed to eat to be acceptable, right? So like food rules, macros, whatever programming people have, I call all diets programming. Whatever programming you've been put through or put yourself through it's all mental as a adaptive strategy, to try to fit in, to try to be safe. That's all it comes down to. And it's hard when you don't, to know like, oh, there's no more rules. I can eat what I want. I've spent so much time not asserting myself, not knowing how to listen to what I want. It's kind of atrophied. So there's a lot of a somatic approach to helping people with this is pushing, like literally, I don't know what I want to eat. And you give them all kinds of options and they still don't know which one to choose. So it's like, how about you get up and push against the wall? Let's do a modified push, like a push-up position against the wall, and just give a little push, and then relax and do it again, and come back. And some people are like, I don't know, I still don't know. That's okay. Like, let's just do the best we can with what you used to remember, used to like. We'll get there. It's okay. And some people, it's immediately they're like, oh, I just being able to like assert myself against something, like something's there and I pushed, I know who I am now. So it's like a metaphor. If like I know where my body is in the space, I can be more in, so how that kind of reflects in the body is, oh, I can locate what I want. Yeah. Because I'm here enough and I can push. And the next stage would be the reach, right? Like I know I want steak and potato. So some people have if once they know what they want, like, yeah, I knew I know what I want now. And the next stage is, can I reach? Can I get it? And sometimes what that will look like when we have trouble reaching is like, oh, well, if somebody gives it to me, I can reach for it. But reaching with my own choice and volition feels really scary, like going to the grocery store or taking the package out of the refrigerator, putting it in the pan. I start to do it, and then I get in my head, and I think that's the brain clicks in as a survival strategy. Oh, it's too much fat or it's too much calories or whatever, when really it's the body fear first, and the brain is trying to make meaning of why you're so scared. Yep. So that there's a reach thing. So we have to help people reach, which is a lot of times assisted meals really, really help with that. Like somebody else, like you're reaching and I'm pushing it to you, and can you take it? Can you grab it now? And if they have some good experiences of eating where what they wanted was not criticized, not rejected, not told, like, no, you don't really want that. You actually want this. which is, our culture, right? Everybody's trying to tell us what we should eat and how much we should eat and how to do it. And it gets scary to reach, because if you go to reach for what you want, maybe somebody in your history made a comment about your food, like, oh gosh, you got a second helping of that. So you went to reach for that second helping, and you got like, you're going to stop wanting to reach because somebody's going to notice it and then maybe make a comment. So we're trying to help that reach be safe again, which is whether that's self-care work and whether that's just continued practice of reaching, nothing bad happens. And literally, if people are struggling to do it on their own, assisted meals really help the reach get better fast. Yeah.
So there's two things that come up for me with everything you said there. I mean, one is with that reach piece, the thing that can be difficult afterwards is if that food isn't as enjoyable as someone imagines it's going to be. Because I think that can be a really difficult piece, especially if it is something that someone deems as a challenge food or a high-calorie food or whatever. There's this feeling of like, if I'm going to have that amount of energy come in, it better be the best thing I've ever eaten. And like 99 times out of 100, that's just not going to happen. Like, it's not going to be as exciting, as amazing as you've imagined it's going to be. And I think that can be a challenge for people to get through.
This is less somatic, but it's more just like, disappointing, huh?
Yeah.
And we're teaching people it's almost like, Chris, you and I get to, like, through the doorway of food and food experiences and body experiences, like through that doorway, so much more gets learned about, like, resilience, right? Like, disappointing. We get disappointed. Yeah, what can we do with that? Because the good news about the body is, like, even if it's not a mistake, but sometimes if you get disappointed with how quickly you got full or that wasn't as good as you thought, I am so grateful. Our bodies are so awesome, because we're going to get hungry again in a couple hours, handful of hours, and we get to try again. Yeah. What's that like for you? And it's like, you're really building some skills that they didn't probably learn. Like, I didn't learn how to do disappointment. Like, I didn't deal with that well, so I try to be perfect. So it's like, I didn't, it's like, or I was used to, like, everything being crappy, like, emotionally. So, like, what's the point of getting excited about anything?
Yeah.
Well, and that's where you don't learn to like anything. Like, well, why get excited about food being pleasure? Who cares about pleasure? Just eat what you got to eat. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes the other part, like what you were saying, I definitely agree with. The other part to point out is, like, when you've had food being so restricted for so long and be this big drama in your life, like, as you recover, it stops being that. And that can often just feel like someone's losing something. Like, the novelty of eating is just disappears.
And there's a hole there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a hole there of, like, this was my excitement. This was my friend, my pleasure, my excitement, something. So it fills a hole, the thing that was missing, which is co-regulation, right? It's like, oh, I'm eating because something was missing.
Yeah.
And our job is to help them discover, well, what's missing, through that experience with food. When you get sad that, like, you're not binging and you're not getting really full, or you're not going to eat. I did all these things, so I'm giving my own experiences here. Like, oh, like, now what do I do when, like, I'm full of cookies, but now I'm just still sad? Well, this sucks. It takes some time to, like, build inner self-soothing, essentially, to, like, when we feel sad. And we do that usually with good experience with people or learning how to, like, ride the waves ourselves. And it just takes time.
Yeah. Definitely. And then the other thing was just in terms of the unsure piece for reaching for food. So I would kind of differentiate between what you described, which seems to be someone having the unsureness pretty much across the board at every opportunity to eat, versus it occurring at intermittent points. And typically when it appears at intermittent points, when I investigate, I'm like, you've just got to a point of being too hungry, and that's what's going on. Because I've had the experience. I haven't had an eating disorder, but I've definitely had the experience of being so hungry that I've walked around a supermarket for 20 minutes still not being able to just pick something.
Yes. So maybe some like, here's the idea of, like, I don't know what to eat. So it could be I'm too hungry and the body doesn't care anymore what you pick, just pick something.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
High density, please. Sometimes it's like, oh, I've been eating too repetitively. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not really connected truly. Now that I've eaten all the foods, food's not that special. So I'm just kind of going through that grieving time of like, oh, food isn't this big, high priority thing besides just needing to get my needs met anymore. And that's just new and weird and different. And then I always call it, now the real adulting begins, right? Where it's like, oh, I got to do this thing where I make a grocery list and like kind of sort of have an idea what I'm going to make, though I'm not just staring at the pantry like people who haven't had an eating disorder, let's say. Because planning doesn't mean that you're being restrictive or being obsessive. It just means we got to bring food in the house.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a new experience doing it from a providing perspective versus depriving perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And that is definitely something I point out a lot with people, because I think what can feel like a disordered behavior isn't a disordered behavior, because in the other context, it's just planning. And it completely makes sense. Like, there's nothing wrong with bringing snacks with you if you're like, I'm going to be out and I want to have something to eat. But there's probably something wrong with the situation if you're like, I have to bring this snack with me because there's no food that I'm allowed to eat out in the rest of the environment because I only eat this handful of safe foods.
Right. That's right.
So look, the final thing I wanted to ask before we wrap this up, like I see on your site that you run a study a handful of times a year where you teach the book When Women Stop Hating Their Bodies. And this is a book like I've never read before, so I just wanted to hear why you picked this book, why it's so important for you, why do you think it's so helpful when running those sessions to have that book as the backbone?
There's so many good body image books now, so many good ones. But I always keep coming back to this book because it really gets into the metaphor of when you're saying, oh, my belly is too far out there. What are we saying? And these groups were, when this book was written, it was basically like the experiences of the therapist interviewing and working and unpacking with these women what these phrases actually meant from like the inside out. And it's easy to say, oh, well, I don't have the right belly because look at everybody, the culturally acceptable belly is smaller and flatter and tighter and all that. But we're saying so much more. My belly it's so big, it's so out there. And I'm like, out there for what? And been in a really loving, like exploratory way of like, what's in there that you're saying it's too much for? And you get so much information than just like, just trying to start off with. It's almost like if you understand what you're actually trying to communicate with, let's say, a body part that you're trashing, you get to the heart of what is feeling so uncomfortable, what feels like it's not acceptable. And it's always like an experience or a state or an emotion or something that includes living in fat phobic culture, but also just relationship with ourselves and with other people and how we're going to do life. So it just goes through that over and over and over again. And there's so many really, really good experiential exercises. And I love it because it's from the perspective of what most people look like, which isn't thin. And that's really important to me because most people aren't going to recover in like a thinner body. There's going to be all kinds of bodies. And I just think that any body size would benefit from doing the exercise in this book and just hearing the really raw experiences of going through like what these things feel like. And when you're in this, like, I can't stay in this body and I want to get rid of it. And learning how to really being in the rawness of that in this book is super powerful. And people, navigate this and have a healthy relationship with food without getting smaller. It's pretty amazing.
Nice. Well, look, I definitely need to check it out. I will add it to my Amazon list. I've got a pretty crazy stack of books at the moment, but it will get read, and I'll let you know. I'll let you know my thoughts. So, look, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where should people go if they want to be finding out more about you or connecting with you, like website, social media, that kind of thing?
Oh, thanks for offering. So my website is simple. It's tracybrownrd.com. And I do a lot of Facebook Lives, and I do a lot of 3 times a week. So at Tracy Brown RD on Facebook, that's where I'm mostly kind of hanging out. And I kind of have conversations with people like we did with you today here, Chris, just taking one little topic and distilling one little piece of it down for like 5 to 10 minutes, because I want people to have like this growth edge of nuance beyond like, the intellectual. I want them to have like this embodied experience. So I practice that with people in little nuggets. So that's essentially what I do. And I also do a lot of training for professionals. So that's over at embodieddietitian.com, where I teach counseling skills and body image unpacking stuff and trauma integrated work. So that's where I'm mostly hanging out.
Perfect. Well, look, I hope people go and check that out because, I really enjoyed this conversation today. This is a topic that I'm just starting to delve into. And so it was nice to be able to speak to someone who's been doing this for 8 years and get so much more color than I can see at the moment.
And if you ever want to have me come back, because, I just scratched the surface, and I bet you if you talk to me in 2 years or 5 years, like, oh, Chris, I still didn't know what I was talking about. This is much better. Like there's more understanding. So anyway.
Perfect.
I appreciate that. Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure, and I hope that somebody, just even one person, like, oh, that rubbed up feeling is what's messing up my hunger fullness. Oh, me feeling like I can't locate, or I keep eating past fullness. There's a function for that, and I want to say yes, there is. It's not because you're trying to hurt yourself.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you, and I will definitely speak to you again.
All right, thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.